welcome to The Journey, a podcast to help you be the very best parent you can be. We are thrilled you are here and that we get to do life together. We are here to serve your family, and we're thankful you're joining us on The Journey.
All right, parents, welcome back to The Journey. We are talking with Erin Williams, our upper school counselor at the Plano campus, and we're talking about a book that you gave me to read. It's called Never Enough: When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic and What We Can Do About It.
That's a good one.
So let's start. I know I've got a lot of questions about the book and some of the things that the author is going to bring out, which is very interesting. I do enjoy books like this because they give us a lot of things to talk about.
Sure do.
But 1 minute kind of summary, what's your one takeaway from the book?
Well, the reason I picked it up was because of our fearless leader, Dr. Cole. She actually sent it to me, and then I thought, you know what, I started to get into it, and I thought this is a book about our specific student body. It's about kids in affluent, high-achieving schools. And so I think rarely do I get a piece of literature that's so specific. I went to a private school as well, so I know the kind of arena we're dealing with, and it is just honing in on these types of kids. So basically exactly what the tagline says, that our achievement culture, which is a lot of it coming top-down from parents, is just pushing our kids into mental health crisis. Yeah. Addiction, anxiousness, depression, and a lot of people think, oh, these kids who are in affluent areas, who have a lot of money, have everything, and what could they possibly be going through? And so these kids are actually a big at-risk community now.
Okay, so you said it, because this is where she starts. Jennifer Wallace. She is saying that when we talk about at-risk community, at-risk students, if you and I just talked to the average person and said, hey, would the students at PCA be in an at-risk category, right? The answer would definitely be no. Right. But Wallace is saying, no, hang on a sec. Before you just run past this, right? When we're talking about mental health and well-being, when we're talking about stress and anxiety, when we're talking about just this idea that that they feel so stressed out to the point where they never feel like they're going to be enough, right? That our students are right smack dab in the center of that at-risk category. And so when she starts with that, right, I think a parent's going to push back on that and just say, listen, all of our kids have everything that they need. Right. How in the world could they be at risk?
Right. Well, I think there's even kind of memes about how easy private school kids have it, and they can be funny, but I think it's less about money or socioeconomic status, like middle or upper class, but about the environment these kids are in. So one of the things I love that she said is that our kids are feeling like unrelenting pressure, like constant stress from school to parents to athletics. Just their bodies and their minds are just stressed and in this state of maybe fight or flight all the time, just extreme pressure, and that they might have money or cars or whatever it is their parents are giving them, opportunities, but they're missing such a big part of life, kind of like, we'll get into that later, but this is painful for these kids when they're feeling like they're not enough and they can't live up. And one of the quotes in the book that I loved is, pain to a child is pain to a child. So just because these kids' parents might have money or they live in this house or have this or that, it's the environment that they're in. And in our case, a lot of our kids are in kind of an unrelenting pressure. Sometimes it's like a pressure cooker, I feel like at school too. Not without great intention, I think, from parents and from educators and from staff. But we also have to be very aware of what that's doing. Yeah,
because, I think parents are going to hear this and say, well, I know that the school and parents want what's best for my child. And so, your average 14, 15, 16-year-old student isn't going to wake up in the morning and say, what's the very best that I can do? How can I strive for excellence, right? They're going to look for the easy way out. But a lot of this pressure, right, where they constantly have this unhealthy pressure that's being put on them. Wallace writes this in her book. She goes, the parent-child bond is the most important relationship for the child's mental health. When a child cannot meet a parent's high expectations, that bond becomes jeopardized. Criticism feels like rejection, a loss of love. So that's really kind of what we're talking about. It's just that no matter what the student does, in a sense, it's never enough, right, to really have that love, that affection of the parent.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of us, I'm guilty, are like, hey, I love you no matter what. Who hasn't said that? No matter what grade you make, no matter how the game goes. And then your kid walks in the door and you're like, how'd you do on that test? Like, what homework do you have? And it's like, that you're that's a double standard. And so you have to really be careful about the words that come out of your mouth, because kids pick up on those little things. It's like, well, you say you don't care about my grades, and we do care to an extent, but like every question you're asking me, I find that like some parents are just nonstop about the academics, and it's like the first thing they hear when they come home, and then they're just on top of them all the time, and it's the same thing over and over again, and we're just not maybe diversifying our conversations enough, maybe, or every time we do have those opportunities. And I think also it comes from parents' own stress. There was a mother that talked about how she had developed this anxiety, and so she micromanaged her kid to help herself. And so I think a lot of our parents are feeling that. I'm like that. So I have a fourth grader, so not even in the upper school, and I often feel like, oh my gosh, he has all these things to do. So I get home and I'm trying to, hey, Levi, let's do this and let's do that. And he's getting stressed because I'm stressed because I know he has this work. And so we're creating and that's all we're doing at night. And then everybody's feeling stressed out. And I'm like, what? I have to really sit back and talk to myself through, like, what's really important? What is he hearing me say? What is our home life looking like? How am I making him feel? And so I think parents are kind of taking on this anxiety that comes from, we can talk about this later, I think we do that too, is about colleges and this sense of scarcity. And so they're feeling a lot of pressure too. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the parent-school conflict, because sometimes when your son or daughter isn't doing the things that you're expecting them to do, right, one of the things as a parent is, we kind of swoop in there. And instead of kind of looking at, our own son or daughter and asking them, what are they doing and how can they do it better? Sometimes we come in there and we provide stress and tension to that, to the school environment, to the teacher, right? Why isn't, Johnny learning? Why isn't, Susie doing well, etc., over and over again. And Wallace writes about this conflict because, right, as a parent, it's like we can have these emails, we can have these phone calls, and then we retreat, right? But the parent, the student has to go to school every day, and he's got to walk the halls. And she writes in here, she says that the acrimonious relationship between parents and teachers is like throwing kids into the stress of an ugly divorce, right? So sometimes parents don't realize that, while you're trying to help your son or daughter, you're ended up making things worse.
Yeah, they feel like that divide, kind of like, that is a bold statement about divorce, but it is true. The relationships kids have with adults on campus are just vital for resilience, for mattering. Some of the statistics are like your percentage for resiliency goes up if you have one good adult relationship in your life, one other than a parent. So these relationships are very important to these kids, and they spend so much time with their teachers and the staff. So, you're kind of joint custody situation with parents and teachers, and they can feel that. A lot of times kids are like, don't email my teacher, because then I have to go back to school the next day and I have to kind of deal with this. And so when the school and the parents can come together, and like that's what PCA is about this partnership, it really works out best for the kids, which is what we're here to do. So we have to remember that as parents.
She talks a lot about hyper competition. And it's a very interesting thing as she goes through. It's not just that our students are trying to excel or that we expect them to excel, but that we want them to do better than others. And that's right, that line, right? And just, one of the things that she wrote about is where one of the dads was telling his daughter, don't be friends with people who play the same position that you are, right? So if you're libero on the volleyball team and there's another libero and you guys are good friends, it's like, no.
Heaven forbid.
Don't be friends with her because you guys are going to fight over playing time. So you can't be friends because it's all about, right, that competition. What does that do for our kids where they don't just have to excel and be great at what they're doing, they have to be better than others?
Right. Well, I just don't think that provides us any real life skills. There is a beautiful story in this book about an all-girls school in a newspaper about how these 4 best friends are going all for editor-in-chief, and the teacher and the parents do a beautiful job of helping these girls through that situation by saying, like, they basically we're better together, and what is this going to look like if you get it and I don't? And like it really takes adult scaffolding and help to help these students. So if I'm the libero, like, I hope you're best friends with the other one, and let's talk about what that looks like instead of like, we just cannot be friends. That's so cutthroat, and that isn't teaching our kids anything about relationships or generosity or love or any of the fruits of the spirit. I think that's where we have to then think about, as parents, the long game. Like, what are we really doing with these kids? Like, is the long game for you varsity volleyball? Is the long game Princeton or Harvard? Because if that is, that might be all you get. So like, we really have to think about the long game, which is what we want how these kids are going to be as adults in marriages and relationships out in the world. And so I think that's where we do a disservice for our kids. I think one of the interesting statistics in the book was that the parents are really also competing against other parents, right? And so it's not really like, I want you to do well. It's like it said 80% of the parents believed academic and professional success were the top priority of other parents. So I think everybody is thinking that when only actually 15% of parents name that as our priority. Yep. So everybody's just thinking everybody's looking at each other. And we try so hard here to say, like, stay in your lane, stop looking. I've been in so many meetings where I'm like, what are other kids doing? What is this kid doing? What's the average night? What's the average 10? And I'm like, it doesn't even matter. Like, let's just focus on what your kid. And that's really hard to do in these types of places. This place here and any type of high pressure affluent school.
Yeah, I like how you said that, as we're from a parent perspective, as we're dealing with our students and teaching them about these particular things, you said it takes kind of parent scaffolding, but then you went into biblical language, which is kind of interesting because Wallace is not writing from a Christian perspective, and so she's going to look at the problem and try to provide some solutions. And it's very interesting. It feels a lot like Jonathan Haidt in his books, right? Where, we're looking at, coddling of the American mind, the anxious generation. We're seeing these problems somehow through an evolutionary, lens. But then when we give solutions, they're very biblically tainted. And, It's like, well, the language is super familiar. Yeah. There's a book called The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness, The Path to True Christian Joy by Tim Keller that specifically, in 46 pages, by the way, specifically deals with that idea of, how can we as Christians not accept the joy and the promotion of other people, like that it has to be a problem for ourselves, right? That hyper competitiveness. Yeah. And I just think, it's not just an adult scaffolding that these kids need to have. It's a biblical one, right? Like when you talked about the long game, is the ultimate goal for our son or daughter to play high school sports, college sports, pro sports? Is our ultimate goal to get into this particular college, have this particular job, right? Or is it really to produce the character, right, that wherever God takes them and wherever they go, they're going to be successful at whatever event that they're doing? And
I love when she talks a little bit about like interdependence too, about needing other people and other people needing you, and this reciprocal joy that you get. I think, man, these kids are missing out on this beautiful joy that you can get when you're for other people. Like, if I'm always in competition, like I can't receive that when my best friend makes the varsity volleyball team, or when my best friend gets into the school I wanted to get into. But I really think that comes from, again, I say this over and over, top down. How are we as parents showing them what these relationships should look like? Am I feeling joyful for my friends when they're getting pregnant and I want to be pregnant, or when they're in a relationship that I want, or they get a promotion, or they sell their company? Can I be like, that's amazing. Like, I'm sharing in that joy with you. Or I think a lot of our student body is like, has this faux sense of connection around actually like the downfall of other people. Like, we're connecting with people because like they messed up and that makes us feel better. And so I think it's top down. They're just missing out on so much when we're kind of pitting them against each other.
Yeah. Yeah. She writes a lot about the importance of family connectedness, right, is the strongest protective factor against distress, eating disorders, suicidal thoughts, right? So just that idea that, yes, your kids are watching what you say, they're watching what you do, they're paying attention to those things. And so this pressure and this stress that they're feeling, right, really, as you said, it's a top-down issue. Yeah. And so that's why we're talking about this on a parent podcast. Exactly. Right? We're not just running out there at chapel and talking to the students, hey, you guys need to be less stressed, because that stress really is being placed upon them, right, in the homes.
Well, one of the things that she says is that kids that go to schools that are high pressure, like, hey, this isn't a bad thing to go to school where there's a push, but they really need a warm place to come home to. So that is huge, and that's a parent thing. There is a podcast that I listened to about two, I think it was called The Minimalist, and they have this thing called Solve for Wednesday. So they were actually talking about marriages, and their marriage was like in a bad place, and they were trying to figure out, like, they have a bunch of kids and it's feeling stressful and rushed, like, what do we do? And so they sat down, they said, how do we want our house to feel on a Wednesday. Like when our kids come home, like what do we want it? What do we want it to smell like? We want it to feel like? What do we want the vibe to be? Do we want it to be like, are we all rushing around? Like, and they just said, we want it to feel calm and warm in a place where they can rest. And their kind of mantra was like, let's just solve for Wednesday. I think it's so important for parents. It's like, we are running around, and at the end of the day, like, we just need to solve for Wednesday. Like, when these kids walk in the door, what do you want them to feel? What do you want to feel like when you walk in the door from work or from running errands? Like, how do you want your home to be? And our kids need a soft place to land. They need to rest. They need connectedness, togetherness. They need to have fun. I talked to a parent the other day because we were discussing grades and all the things in college and how do I push and when do I push? And I look at the grades every day and I said, well, why don't we just pick, and this was for a junior, why don't you just pick one time a week? Because it has to work for both parent and child. Yeah. So why don't we pick one time during the week where we're talking for, 10, 15 minutes, and that's a time when I can ask questions about your grades because that works for me. We can go through it, and that's a time we'll have that conversation, and then I won't ask about it for the rest of the week. Because when we get into the upper grades, maybe not for lower school, they can kind of do those things on their own. But when parents are just constantly on them, then our house becomes a place where we don't want to be at either. And that relentless pressure comes into the home. And so I just want to challenge our parents to solve for Wednesday. Have a conversation with your spouse. What do you want this to look like? I got this candle warmer, and I feel like it changes the vibe in our house. Like things smell better. I mean, just little tiny things, Yep. So how can we just make our homes like a soft place to land for them?
Yeah. So one of the conversations, right, with my 4 kids and about grades. So it's like, I've been through high school, I've been through college, right? I've been through all that, and I think one of the things that I learned through the process that really grades weren't as important as everybody thinks they are or promotes that they are, because I've watched a lot of people cheat to get good grades but didn't learn anything.
Sure.
I've watched a lot of people learn things that got bad grades and they ended up doing better. And so my concept always was, when I was talking to my own children at home, was one, did you do your best, right? I mean, as you walked into a test or when you're putting on that project, like, is that the best effort that you could have done? And that's all I want you to do. But the other part is, did you learn something through the process, right? Because if you didn't and you got an A, I don't feel like that was really helpful for you, right? But if you really did and you got a B or you got a C, but you know what? You're like, man, I really learned something. I'm like, okay,
that's really cool,
right?
Yeah.
And the whole concept of that our students have to be good at everything. That's the other part is, in the educational world and the way that it's set up, is if your student is really good at one particular area, they may not be good at something else. Well, guess what? When they leave here and they go out into the world, they're not going to have to do all the other things that they're not good at.
Right.
They can focus on the things that they really are good at.
And let's not ruin the things that they are good at and that they love. There's this great story in the book too where she talks about a mom. She does the book's great because she does a ton of interviews with a lot of families, so it hits close to home on lots of levels. But this little boy who put together all these blocks and Legos and was just incredible at it and loved architecture. And so she went and she was trying to find him a camp, and then she was trying to find him just something to pique that interest. And she finally got a hold of a college professor who would let him sit in on a class, a 6th grader. And the boy was like, Mom, I love architecture. Don't ruin it for me. Yeah. And so it's and then she was like, oh, okay, thank you. Because I think we take these things and we run with them a little bit too far. Again, with the grades, maybe I love history and I'm into it and I'm getting a B. Well, we're learning. And so I think it's just adjusting our expectations or what is our definition of success? We've talked about that, kind of changing that definition of success and what it means for our family or for our kids. And it's different for everybody.
Yeah. One of the things she was talking about is sometimes when your kids have a passion or an interest, all of a sudden we make it into a line on their resume.
Yes.
It's like, oh, you want to volunteer? Great. Okay, well, here's the volunteer opportunities, and we set up this, we set up that, and then you need to be in a position of leadership, and this is right. And so now, right, nothing in their life they're doing just for the sake of doing it, or they're doing because they enjoy it. They're doing it because it looks good on a resume.
It's a line item.
It's a line item.
That's rough.
Now, you talked about going home, and home being a soft place, right? A safe place, a place where, kids can be kids and they can enjoy that and we can love them. One of the things she talks about, though, is the importance of giving them meaning and purpose as well. And she talks about chores, which is kind of an interesting thing. I thought was kind of a unique thing. We did chores, and I've recommended chores to so many parents, and I get this big kind of pushback, like chores. And I'm just like, I mean, Admiral McRaven had a huge, thing where, a book called Make Your Bed, right? Which is, you wake up in the day, you make your bed, you've accomplished something. Yeah. And you're like, what? And he's like, listen, you accomplish one thing, guess what? Accomplishing something else and accomplishing something else, then it becomes kind of a habit and a pattern. Yeah. So just get up and start something. And she kind of does that idea is, are there opportunities for your kids to get involved in things where they actually have a purpose and it's like somebody's excited to see them there, right? Where can they get plugged in and do that? What do you think from a parent perspective?
People want to contribute. Yeah. Like, I want to know that I matter. Like, where I work, at home, like, if I left here, like, would it have mattered? Did I contribute? And kids as young as elementary school age, the same thing. Like, do I matter to this family? I had a dad that came in, and we were talking about that. Like, a kid was like, if I wasn't here, like, I wouldn't matter, and how do I, involve in this family? And so we talked about, what is his purpose? Like, how does he contribute to the family? And, chores is a great way, especially at a young age. Yeah. Like, okay, you are contributing and we need you in this. And I think maybe there's pushback because, or I think it matters how we talk about it. It matters how parents lay it out there for kids. So if we're just making you do the chores for the sake of whatever it is, but we have to talk about it along, like, the mattering perspective. Like, you matter to this family. When I pray with my kids every night, I say, like, thank you for giving me Levi, Martha, or Harvey. Like, our family wouldn't be the same without them. Yeah. Like, you matter in this family, and we need you. Because if you weren't here, this wouldn't work the same. So I think it's just, again, a parent awareness of how we're talking, what we're doing, the intentionality behind the chore, the intentionality behind what we're saying when they come home. And I know that takes a lot of it takes a lot of thought, but I think it becomes second nature after a while.
Yeah, she spends a lot of time dealing with the issue of mattering.
Yes.
And just kind of that reminder that we're human beings. Yeah. So we matter because we're made in the image of God. We matter 100%. Because this is our family, and you play a particular role in it, right? And without you, right, we wouldn't be the same. And so the focus really for Wallace, and I do love this from a biblical perspective, yes. right, is you don't matter because of the things that you do. Correct. You matter because of the person that you are. Right. And so how can we reinforce that from a parent perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're doing a good job of that. I don't hear that from kids. Now, I'm hearing one side because I'm seeing kids all day, but I had students in here this morning. It was like, my parents are just writing me all the time. It's like, I can't do good enough in my grades, or I'm not, she said, even my driving, it was like everything. And that might not be the whole truth, but that's kind of what they're perceiving. Sure. And so I think we have to be intentional, even if it's just carving out a little bit of time to make sure they know that they matter. I think a huge thing that I tell our parents in our meetings is a little bit about play. I know these are kids. I mean, even up to our seniors, like, these are still kids. We, in the upper school, we had one day of senior recess, and this was in the fall, and they're still talking about it. And these are 18-year-olds who are playing dodgeball, knockout, and they just want to have fun and play. And I think if we can also take that to the home level, like, hey, these kids want to play with you. Like, they want to have fun. And so we have to be intentional of, like, making sure that they know that they matter in that way. And I think also I heard a quote that was saying the only way to combat overwhelm is nothingness or play, because play is essentially nothingness to the brain. And so how can we incorporate that? But in this world of unrelenting pressure, it's like there's no room for that. Like, oh my gosh, we have to get our 18 extracurriculars. Like, we don't have extra time, which is kind of unfathomable. Yeah. Like, these kids are going to bed. One of my students today said, I went to bed before midnight for the first time in months. I mean, they're getting very little sleep and very little free time, and that's not real life. Like, when they leave here, they're going to have free time, and they're going to have to figure out how to organize their lives. And I think we need to do a better job of showing them how to do that here.
Wow, what an engaging and powerful conversation with Erin Williams on the book Never Enough. Make sure you come back next week as we continue this conversation, and we're going to get into a little bit more a practical application on what you can do to make sure that you are producing a house that has peace, but also challenges your students to do their very best for God's glory.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Journey. We hope this podcast provides information to help you raise your children, and it would help us tremendously if you would like, subscribe, share, and review this content on your favorite podcast platform. It is our pleasure to provide this information to our community, and we look forward to our next time together on The Journey.